The first wave of pale blue water slammed through my bean rows before I could reach the shutoff trench. It carried mulch, tomato cages, and the sharp chemical smell of a public pool across the garden my wife and I had spent 12 years building. At the upper fence, a white discharge pipe was pouring steadily from the direction of the HOA clubhouse. HOA President Valerie Knox stood beside the maintenance cart with her arms folded. "It's clean water. Stop interfering with association maintenance." I didn't touch the pipe. I photographed the flow, marked the wet line with survey flags, and filled 3 sterile sample bottles while my security camera recorded the clock on the pump house wall. Valerie watched as if I were saving ordinary rainwater. 2 days later, the independent lab found a combination of cyanuric acid, elevated chloride, and copper-based algicide consistent with treated pool water, not irrigation runoff. But the bigger surprise came from the county's approved plumbing plan. No discharge line was supposed to cross my boundary at all. Somewhere beneath the hedge, the HOA had connected its pool system to a pipe the county had never approved, and my ruined garden was only the first place that pipe had surfaced. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 54 then, old enough to know that anger can destroy evidence faster than water destroys seedlings. I had spent 26 years as a landscape contractor before reducing my workload and turning our 2 acres into a small market garden. Claire handled the orders and bookkeeping. I handled the soil, irrigation, and the stubborn work of keeping vegetables alive through hot summers. That morning she came running from the packing shed carrying sterile bottles and a box of disposable gloves. Water had already reached the pepper beds. She stopped when she saw a cedar planting marker floating past her boots. Our daughter had painted it when she was 11. The lettering was faded, but Claire recognized it immediately and lifted it from the water without speaking. I wanted to cross the fence and close whatever valve the workers had opened. Instead, I stayed on our side. I filmed the pipe, the maintenance cart, and the water's path. Claire wrote the time on each bottle, while I collected 1 sample at the outlet, another in the center beds, and a third near the lower drainage swale. By the time the flow weakened, 6 tomato cages had collapsed. Lettuce leaves lay pressed flat beneath gray mulch, and the drip lines had lifted from their anchors. A thin, blue-green residue clung to the grass where the water stopped. Valerie climbed into the cart without offering a damage report or the name of the maintenance company. Before she drove away, she pointed toward the pipe. "Do not block HOA infrastructure." I photographed the tire tracks and placed the sealed bottles in a cooler. Then Claire called our customers to cancel Saturday's produce pickup while I checked the eastern fence for anything that might identify the line. Above the outlet, half hidden beneath ivy, I found a faded orange utility marker. Orange identified communications service. It did not identify drainage. And when I pulled our deed packet from the fireproof cabinet that afternoon, the narrow easement along that fence mentioned electrical and communication lines, but not one word about water. The Walker parcel had been there long before anyone planted the stone entrance sign for Alder Ridge. Claire's parents bought the old farmhouse and 2 surrounding acres in 1987, when the land uphill was still pasture. We purchased it from them after our daughter was born, renovated the packing shed, and gradually replaced hard clay with compost-rich beds. The subdivision arrived 14 years later. Its developer built the clubhouse near our eastern line because the slope gave residents a view across the valley. The pool sat roughly 70 yards uphill from our pepper beds. Our property was never annexed into the association, and we never paid dues or used its amenities. The only recorded connection was a 12-foot utility strip running beside our fence. I spread our deed, title policy, and closing survey across the kitchen table. The easement language was narrow: underground facilities for electrical power and communication service, with a right of access for installation and repair. I read it 3 times. There was nothing about stormwater, wastewater, drainage, or pool maintenance. Claire sat opposite me with her laptop open. She had built a spreadsheet from the orders she canceled that morning. 17 customers had expected tomatoes, peppers, lettuce, and herbs that weekend. 2 local restaurants depended on our weekly herb delivery, and 1 chef had already printed a seasonal menu around it. The immediate loss was not enough to ruin us, but the flooded soil was the real threat. If the chemical concentration was high, we could not simply rinse the leaves and sell them. We would have to suspend harvesting, test the root zone, and explain the interruption without making claims we could not yet prove. She placed our daughter's wet cedar marker on a towel beside the computer. Blue-green residue had dried along one edge. "I know it's just a piece of wood," she said. "It isn't just wood." The garden had never been a hobby we could abandon when it became inconvenient. It was where Claire recovered after surgery 6 years earlier, walking one row at a time until she could carry a harvest basket again. It was where our daughter learned to measure seed spacing before she understood fractions in school. Every bed carried some small record of our family, even if none of that would appear on an insurance form. The next afternoon, an envelope arrived by certified mail from Valerie. The letter identified the white pipe as part of a historic common utility corridor and ordered me not to block, alter, or inspect association infrastructure. It also stated that the HOA was not responsible for damage caused by ordinary drainage. I scanned the letter and sent it to our title agent. Then I replied to Valerie in writing. I did not accuse her of poisoning the garden or threaten a lawsuit. I asked for the recording number, installation permit, and recorded instrument that authorized pool water to cross our land. Her response arrived as a 4-page PDF. The first page was a landscaping diagram with the clubhouse, pool, hedges, and a dashed line labeled Common Utility/Drainage. The remaining pages were maintenance guidelines adopted by the HOA board 9 years after the subdivision opened. The diagram looked official until I checked the footer. It had been prepared for a landscaping renovation, not recorded with the county. It contained no surveyor's seal, no parcel bearings, and no easement references. More important, the dashed line had been drawn over our property as if the fence were merely decorative. I drove to the county records office the following morning. The clerk helped me retrieve the original subdivision plat and every recorded instrument listed on it. The plat showed our parcel as separate private property. The 12-foot strip was marked for power and communications, exactly as our deed described. There was no drainage corridor and no pool pipe. Back home, Claire and I walked the eastern boundary with copies of both maps. Near the flooded beds, the HOA's dashed line crossed straight through our greenhouse before bending toward the clubhouse. Any surveyor would have noticed that contradiction. Then Claire saw a date in the landscaping diagram's file information. It had been created during the pool renovation 6 years earlier, the same renovation listed on a small metal inspection plate attached to the pump house wall. If the pipe was truly historic, I wondered, why did the HOA's first map showing it appear only when the pool was rebuilt? The date on the landscaping diagram gave me a starting point, but it did not tell me what had traveled through the pipe. For that, I needed someone who could preserve the samples properly and explain the results without turning suspicion into certainty. Dr. Lena Ortiz arrived the next morning in a silver hatchback loaded with coolers, soil probes, sterile jars, and more paperwork than I expected. She was an environmental consultant, not a television scientist. Before stepping into the damaged beds, she photographed every container Claire and I had filled, recorded how we had stored them, and explained which samples might be useful and which could be challenged because we had collected them ourselves. Evidence is strongest when the limits are documented with the results, she told me. Lena divided the garden into 3 zones. She collected soil and residue beside the white outlet, more from the center beds, and control samples uphill of the flooded area, but still on our property. Claire followed at a distance, writing bed numbers on a clean copy of the garden plan. I watched Lena seal each jar and felt, for the first time since the flood, that our careful response might matter. The laboratory report arrived 4 days later. Samples from the flooded beds contained cyanuric acid, elevated chloride, and copper, associated with a common algicide. Concentrations weakened farther from the outlet. The control area did not show the same pattern. Claire read the report twice, then quietly moved the canceled order spreadsheet into a folder labeled Hold. Until Lena cleared the soil, neither of us was willing to sell anything grown inside the wet line. Lena called the combination consistent with treated swimming pool water. She also made the boundary of her opinion clear. The chemistry could support the source we suspected, but it could not identify who opened a valve or prove the underground route. We still needed records and physical tracing. That distinction made the report more credible to me, not less. I returned to the county building office with the pool renovation date. A permit technician retrieved the approved plans from 6 years earlier. The drawing showed new filtration equipment, a backwash connection, and a required route to an approved sanitary line. A note directed the contractor to use licensed removal if that connection was unavailable. Nothing on the plan crossed our boundary. The final inspection page was marked complete, but the file contained no change order authorizing another discharge route. I requested certified copies of the plan, inspection record, and permit history, rather than relying on photographs from my phone. Next, I called Caleb Morgan, a licensed plumbing contractor I had worked beside on landscaping projects. He agreed to inspect only from our property and not disturb the outlet. The following afternoon, he fed a flexible camera into the white pipe while I recorded the monitor. The first section was older PVC, stained by years in damp soil. Beneath the fence, however, the camera reached a cleaner coupling and a sharp uphill turn. A black manufacturer code remained visible on the newer fitting. Several feet beyond it, the camera stopped at a junction Caleb could not safely pass. "That coupling isn't historic," he said. "It's from a newer installation inside an older sleeve." He could not identify the other end without access to HOA property, so he prepared a report describing only what he had observed. We compared the code on the coupling with the material list attached to the pool renovation permit. The same product series appeared beside an invoice entry for discharge line fittings. It was not yet proof that the invoice paid for the exact fitting under our fence. It was enough to justify preserving the records before they disappeared. Claire found Rebecca Hale through the title company. Rebecca practiced civil property law and spent nearly an hour reviewing the deed, easement, lab report, and county plans before discussing strategy. She did not promise us a courtroom victory. Her first concern was stopping another discharge and preventing documents or maintenance data from being discarded. That evening, Rebecca sent the HOA and its management company a preservation letter. It identified the damaged property, disputed line, relevant date range, and categories of material that had to be retained: pool maintenance logs, invoices, valve records, board communications, photographs, contracts, and electronic messages. She also requested a jointly supervised inspection of the pump house and underground route. Valerie replied the following afternoon. She rejected the inspection and repeated that the pipe served an authorized utility corridor. She attached no deed, permit, or recording number. Caleb was packing his camera when he paused beside the hedge. He pointed to a shallow impression in the wet soil directly above the newer coupling. 2 parallel tire marks curved away from it toward a maintenance gate on the clubhouse slope. Someone had driven equipment to that exact section of pipe recently. And if Valerie refused an inspection, the next question was whether the HOA planned to use it again. The pipe began to vibrate just after 7 the next morning. I was carrying empty harvest crates toward the packing shed when the ivy shook against the fence and a thin blue stream pushed through the outlet. I set the crates down and started recording. Within seconds, the stream became a pressurized flow that struck the temporary straw barrier I had placed below the damaged beds. The barrier slowed the water but did not stop it. Wet straw rolled downhill, and the flow spread toward the herb rows Claire had kept outside the first contamination line. At the pump house gate, a maintenance cart stood beside a service van. I could see Valerie speaking with a man in a gray work shirt. Neither of them crossed onto our property. I stayed on our side as well. Claire came out carrying the evidence cooler, then froze when she saw the water reaching the rosemary beds. For a moment, she held the cooler against her chest and looked toward the cedar marker drying in our kitchen window. Then she put on gloves and began moving seed trays from the lower bench while I called Lena and Rebecca. Rebecca told me not to cap the pipe or enter association land. She wanted continuous footage showing the outlet, our boundary, and the active flow. Lena asked me to collect no new samples until she arrived, unless the water threatened to stop. It continued for 43 minutes. By the time Lena reached us, the straw barrier had broken apart and the lower drip manifold was buried in silt. She photographed the new wet line, took samples under her own chain of custody procedure, and measured residue in soil that had not been reached during the first event. Valerie sent Rebecca an email before noon. She described the discharge as an emergency response to excessive pool levels following severe weather. The explanation might have sounded reasonable if the sky had not been clear for 9 days. Rebecca obtained certified precipitation data from a nearby weather station. It showed less than 1/10 of an inch of rain during the previous week. That afternoon, the HOA management company delivered a notice accusing me of obstructing common drainage with straw, survey flags, and garden equipment. It threatened daily fines if the interference continued. The notice was addressed to my parcel even though the recorded subdivision declaration excluded it. Rebecca answered with 3 sentences. The Walkers were not association members. The materials were located on their own property. Any further discharge would be included in the request for injunctive relief. The notice still affected us. One restaurant paused its contract after hearing there was a dispute over chemical runoff. 2 customers asked whether produce from the unaffected greenhouse was safe. Claire answered honestly, sent them Lena's sampling map, and offered refunds without argument. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table deleting the next week's harvest quantities from her spreadsheet 1 row at a time. I had focused so completely on preserving the physical evidence that I had not understood how much of the human damage would fall on her. Every customer call required Claire to explain a problem we had not created without overstating what the tests proved. By the end of the week, the garden was still visible from our windows, but the rhythm that had organized our days was gone. The association's insurer contacted us 2 days later. Its adjuster referred to the event as landscaping damage caused by surface runoff and asked for photographs, invoices, and proof that the plants had market value. We provided the requested records, along with the laboratory report, weather data, and security footage. Rebecca instructed us not to estimate future losses until Lena completed a remediation assessment. That assessment was worse than I expected. The most heavily affected soil would need to be removed rather than merely diluted. The irrigation manifold required replacement, and several perennial herb beds could not be replanted until follow-up testing established acceptable conditions. The preliminary remediation estimate exceeded $20,000 before lost production was counted. Caleb returned to inspect the outlet after the ground dried. He found fresh wrench marks on the newer coupling and a bright stainless steel clamp that had not appeared in his earlier camera footage. Someone had serviced the disputed line between the 2 discharges. Rebecca proposed a neutral inspection attended by both parties, followed by a controlled dye test if the plumbing configuration remained disputed. The HOA's attorney refused unless we signed a release covering both floods and all soil damage. We declined. Valerie then circulated a newsletter claiming an adjacent landowner was interfering with essential community drainage. Its photograph showed our greenhouse and eastern fence. Some residents repeated her claim. Others asked why the infrastructure did not appear on the recorded plat. Near sunset, an older resident named Daniel Price stopped at our driveway. He introduced himself as the HOA treasurer, but said he was not there on the board's behalf. He looked toward the damaged beds and lowered his voice. Valerie told us this pipe had county approval, he said. If that isn't true, you should ask for the renovation minutes. He would not discuss the minutes further without legal guidance, and I did not press him. I passed his name and exact words to Rebecca. The next morning, she prepared the civil complaint. Attached to it was Valerie's newest email, which claimed the HOA had used the line for years without objection. It was the first time Valerie had admitted, in writing, that the association had deliberately discharged through the pipe. Rebecca filed the complaint in county civil court that Friday. It did not accuse Valerie of environmental crimes or ask a judge to punish the HOA for being difficult. It asked for relief the evidence could support, a declaration that the utility easement did not authorize pool discharge, an order stopping further use of the pipe, and compensation for trespass, private nuisance, negligence, and documented property damage. The request for temporary relief mattered most. Another 43-minute discharge could spread contamination into the greenhouse beds and increase the restoration cost before the case reached discovery. The HOA answered that the line had existed for years, served a necessary drainage function, and fell within the practical meaning of a utility easement. Its attorney also argued that I had known about the outlet because it was visible near our fence when we purchased the property. Rebecca did not deny the outlet had been there. She separated the existence of a pipe from the right to send treated water through it. Our deed allowed specific services. The HOA could not expand electrical and communication rights simply by drawing the word drainage onto a later landscaping map. At the temporary relief hearing, the judge declined to decide the entire easement dispute from affidavits alone. He did, however, order the HOA not to discharge pool water through the contested line while the case was pending. He authorized a neutral inspection under a written protocol and required both sides to preserve the system in its existing condition. For the first time, the maintenance gate opened without Valerie controlling who could see beyond it. Caleb attended for us. The HOA brought its pool contractor and property manager. A court-approved inspection technician documented the pump house, valves, filtration equipment, and underground lines. Everyone watched as a measured amount of fluorescent tracing dye was introduced into the pool's controlled waste line. No one opened the discharge fully. The technician used only enough water to move the dye through the system without allowing it to spread across the garden. 9 minutes later, green dye appeared inside the white outlet at our fence and was captured in a containment vessel. Video showed the complete procedure, and representatives from both sides signed the sample and inspection log. The route was no longer an assumption. The pool's waistline reached our property through the disputed pipe. Discovery answered the more difficult question: who knew about it, and when? The HOA produced thousands of pages of emails, invoices, meeting packets, and maintenance logs. Rebecca's staff organized them by date. Claire and I reviewed only the documents she flagged, because reading every hostile email would not improve the case or restore a single bed. One invoice from the renovation described a temporary garden-side discharge connection installed because the planned sanitary tie-in had encountered an elevation problem. Attached to it was an email from the original pool contractor warning that the connection was not part of the approved design and should not remain in service. The warning was dated 18 months before the first flood we documented. A later proposal offered to install a pump and complete the approved reroute for approximately $28,000. Valerie forwarded that proposal to the board with a note calling it unnecessary spending for a line that had worked without meaningful complaint. The minutes from the next meeting recorded a vote to defer the work until a cheaper option could be found. Daniel Price's name appeared beside the only opposing vote. Rebecca deposed him after the HOA's attorney confirmed he was represented and available. Daniel testified that the board had been told discharged water could enter our lower garden during a full pool drain or extended backwash cycle. Valerie had assured the board that the utility corridor protected the association and that the county had approved the renovation as installed. The county file contradicted the second statement. The recorded easement contradicted the first. Daniel also identified a maintenance spreadsheet showing smaller discharges before the two events we filmed. Some entries described the destination only as the east outlet. Others listed valve open times ranging from 7 to 19 minutes. Those records explained why patches of lettuce had failed in earlier seasons when we had blamed disease and summer heat. That realization hit Claire harder than the new damage estimates. She found photographs of herself kneeling beside one of those failed beds 2 summers earlier, examining roots and wondering what she had done wrong. For years, she had treated each loss as her own mistake, while a maintenance log in the clubhouse recorded water moving toward our fence. I watched her place the photograph beside Valerie's email. She did not say she wanted revenge. She asked Rebecca whether the settlement could require the pipe to be removed, not merely left closed. Rebecca said permanent physical correction would be part of any resolution we accepted. The evidence divided the board. 2 members submitted declarations saying they had never received the contractor's original warning. Another acknowledged seeing the reroute estimate, but believed Valerie's statement that the existing line was authorized. The HOA's insurer replaced its earlier surface runoff description with a reservation letter and began discussing mediation. Rebecca advised us not to confuse a weakened defense with a finished case. The HOA still argued that long-standing use, notice of the visible outlet, and broad utility language gave it an enforceable right. Its attorney prepared an old construction photograph showing a white pipe near our fence before we bought the property. The photograph was waiting on the hearing exhibit list when Rebecca called the night before testimony began. They finally found their best argument, she said. Tomorrow, we show why an old pipe is not the same thing as a legal right. The HOA's construction photograph filled the courtroom monitor the next morning. It showed the eastern fence line before our greenhouse existed. Near the bottom corner, a white pipe emerged from the slope in approximately the same place as the outlet beside our garden. The association's attorney treated the image carefully. He did not claim the photograph created an easement by itself. He argued that the visible outlet placed every later owner on notice, that the line had served the uphill property for many years, and that the recorded phrase utility service should be interpreted broadly enough to include necessary water management. It was a better argument than calling two chemical floods ordinary runoff. Rebecca began with the original plat and deed. The easement listed electrical power and communication service, then described access needed to install and repair those systems. It did not use general language granting every kind of utility. It did not mention drainage. More important, the photograph showed only an outlet, not what had historically flowed through it or whether anyone possessed a legal right to use it. Caleb explained the physical changes. The outer sleeve and lower section of PVC could be old, consistent with the photograph. The coupling, uphill turn, clamp, and connection into the pool's waste system were newer components. Their manufacturer markings matched the product line documented during the renovations 6 years earlier. The county-approved plan required a sanitary connection or licensed removal. No approved revision redirected pool water toward our parcel. The inspector's completion notation established that an inspection occurred. It did not silently approve work absent from the plans. Then Lena testified about the samples. She explained the concentration gradient from the outlet through the flooded beds, the absence of the same chemical pattern in the control area, and the combination consistent with treated pool water. On cross-examination, she agreed that chemistry alone could not identify who operated the valve. Rebecca did not ask it to. The security footage showed the active outlet and HOA maintenance vehicles. Valve and maintenance logs documented the discharge times. The neutral dye test established the route. The laboratory results established what reached the soil. Each piece answered a different question. The weather records removed Valerie's emergency storm explanation. Less than 1/10 of an inch of rain had fallen during the week before the second discharge. The pool log, however, recorded a scheduled maintenance cycle that morning. Daniel testified next. He confirmed the board received the $28,000 reroute proposal and discussed the contractor's warning. When Rebecca showed him the meeting minutes, he identified his vote against delaying the work. He also acknowledged that some board members believed Valerie when she said county approval and the easement protected them. That testimony mattered because it kept the story honest. Not every director had set out to damage our garden. Some had failed to read the records and relied on a confident explanation that saved the association money. Their failure was still costly, but it was different from inventing a secret plan to harm us. Valerie took the stand late that afternoon. She agreed that the reroute had been postponed because of its cost. She said she believed the old outlet and utility strip permitted continued use. Rebecca placed Valerie's newsletter beside the contractor's warning and asked why homeowners were told the line was approved after the contractor had written the opposite. Valerie paused before answering. I believe the final inspection resolved it. Rebecca displayed the certified permit history. There was no change order, revised drawing, or approval for the garden side connection. The judge's ruling came after written closing arguments. He did not decide that every old pipe was unlawful or that every utility easement excluded drainage. He interpreted the specific recorded documents governing our parcels. Those documents granted no right to discharge pool water across our property. The HOA's later landscaping map could not enlarge the easement, and the physical presence of an outlet did not authorize the newer pool connection. The court permanently prohibited the association from using the line for pool discharge and required it to maintain the temporary shutdown until an approved alternative was operating. The ruling left the amount of damages for trial, which meant both sides still faced months of expert testimony and expense. Claire read the ruling beside me, in Rebecca's conference room. She stopped at the paragraph describing the line as unauthorized and pressed her thumb against the edge of the paper. For 2 years, she had blamed herself for weak lettuce beds, changed seed suppliers, rebuilt irrigation schedules, and carried buckets through summer heat because she believed she had failed the soil. The ruling could not return those seasons, but it finally placed responsibility where the records said it belonged. She folded the old photograph of the failed bed and put it back in her folder without looking at it again. That was when the insurer requested mediation. Rebecca assembled the numbers without exaggeration. $21,400 for soil removal and restoration, $8,600 for crops and irrigation equipment, and $5,200 for laboratory and consulting work. The remaining dispute concerned lost production and the legal expense of forcing a permanent correction. The first offer did not cover the documented restoration. We rejected it. The second included money but allowed the HOA to leave the pipe capped beneath the hedge. Claire rejected that term before Rebecca finished reading it. "Closed is not gone," she said. The final agreement required physical disconnection of the unauthorized junction, removal of the disputed section at our boundary, and construction of the county-approved sanitary route at the HOA's expense. The association agreed to pay us $52,000, covering remediation, crop and irrigation losses, testing, expert expenses, lost production, and negotiated legal costs. The agreement did not grant us a windfall, and it did not pretend every emotional loss had a price. We signed only after Rebecca added a permanent prohibition against reconnecting any pool or wastewater line across our parcel without a new written recorded agreement from the property owner. 3 weeks later, I stood with Caleb and a county inspector beside the eastern hedge. An excavator lifted the newer junction from the soil. The pipe that Valerie had called historic separated cleanly at the 6-year-old coupling. For the first time, the route was visible from the pump house to our boundary. And for the first time since the flooding began, its open end pointed nowhere near our garden. The approved sanitary connection was completed before the pool reopened that spring. A county inspector watched the final test, signed the permit record, and confirmed that the abandoned route toward our land had been physically disconnected. Caleb removed the last section beside our fence. I kept the cut coupling in the packing shed, not as a trophy, but because it was the simplest reminder of how an old pipe had been made to carry a new problem. Restoring the garden took longer. A remediation crew removed soil from the most affected beds and replaced it according to Lena's plan. We rebuilt the lower irrigation manifold, added compost, and waded through follow-up testing before planting anything intended for sale. Claire started with 1 row of beans. She placed our daughter's cedar marker at the end of it after sanding away the chemical stain. The lettering was lighter, and one corner remained warped, but she refused my offer to make a new one. "This one knows where it belongs," she said. The settlement covered the work, the lost crops, our testing expenses, and the negotiated legal costs. It did not make the months disappear. Some customers never returned, and one restaurant found another supplier. Others came back as soon as Lena cleared the soil. We rebuilt the business the same way we rebuilt the beds, one reliable delivery at a time. Inside Alder Ridge, Daniel distributed a factual summary of the plumbing project and the records produced in the case. Residents learned that the board had delayed a $28,000 correction and ultimately paid for litigation, restoration, settlement, and a more expensive emergency reroute. Valerie resigned before the next annual meeting. I did not attend the meeting or ask Daniel for details. The court order and recorded agreement protected our land. Whatever the residents decided about their leadership belonged to them. The first Saturday pickup after clearance felt stranger than the courtroom. Claire arranged a modest table outside the packing shed, then rearranged the same 4 baskets until the first customer turned into our driveway. It was the chef who had changed his seasonal menu after the flood. He bought every herb bundle we had ready and asked whether the beans would return soon. Claire waited until his truck left before allowing herself to cry. By early summer, the new bean vines had climbed above my waist. Claire and I harvested the first basket together just after sunrise. The capped opening beneath the hedge was gone, replaced by fresh soil and a short section of fence we had repaired ourselves. I set the basket beside the cedar marker while Claire took a photograph for our customers. In the background, the garden looked ordinary again. That was exactly what we had fought for. Not revenge, not a windfall, just the right to grow food on our own land, without wondering when someone uphill would open a valve. The case was not won by a dramatic confession. It was won by 3 sealed bottles, careful records, people willing to state the limits of what they knew, and a chain of evidence that led from damaged soil back to the HOA's pipes. If someone claimed a right over your property that never appeared in your deed, would you confront them immediately or document everything first? Share your answer and subscribe for more stories where patience and records change the outcome.